Alexandra, and good morning to you all. It is really a great pleasure and honor to be here today in Cinemateca Portuguesa, this magic repository of memories and of dreams and of action, as we have just heard, and to take part in the extraordinary event that is the Lisbon Consortium. So I would like to thank, first of all, Cinemateca, but very especially all those who have had the responsibility and the work of organizing this event, especially Professor Isabel Capello-Gil. I hope you find that what I am going to talk about is of some use and interest to you, since it is a bit on the philosophical side. It has to do with the ontology of the film image, with the implications of its intrinsic temporal nature. In his seminal book, The World Viewed, Stanley Cavell starts by comparing the importance of art forms such as music, painting, sculpting, or poetry, which he says are not generally important in terms of the average man, and he says except primarily to the men and women devoting to creating them, with the importance of movies, and I quote him, "Rich and poor, those who care about no art and those who live on the promise of art, those whose pride is education and those whose pride is power or practicality, all care about movies, await them, respond to them, are grateful for some of them." And then he adds that its highest and its most ordinary instances attract more or less the same audience, whereas people who attend to serious music usually do not attend to light dinner music, say, or movie music, unquote. Developing his idea about the puzzling phenomenon of popularity in films, Cavell points out, there are, of course, in literature, a few instances of very great artists who are at the same time very popular. But my claim is that in the case of films, it is generally true that you do not really like the highest instances unless you also like typical ones. What is there then, I ask, that makes film so attractive, so important in this particular sense? Many say, as Cavell recalls, that film is the modern art, the one to which modern man naturally responds. But even this acknowledgement must lead us to one of two conclusions. Either we have to admit film is not really an art, or we have to ask ourselves, what kind of thing, what kind of art film really is? What is film? In his equally famous work, Sculpting Time, Andrei Tarkovsky states, in referring to the very first movies by the brothers Lumière, that a new aesthetic principle was born. I should like to point out in passing that the English, Portuguese, Italian, and French translations, maybe even others, of the Russian filmmaker's book, I mean, Sculpting Time, Sculpir o Tempo, Scolpire il Tempo, Le Temps Scellé, do not do entire justice to the original work's title, which I regret not being able to pronounce. When recently listening to Tarkovsky's son Andrei in Lisbon at the Centro Cultural de Belém, I realized his father had not meant to establish a direct analogy with the art of sculpture. He merely wished to emphasize film's ability to capture time, to imprint it, by giving it a precise fixed shape. And in this sense, the French version is closer to his central idea, since sceller, I think, means to seal, to ratify, to confirm. To quote Tarkovsky, for the first time in the history of the arts, in the history of culture, men found the means to take an impression of time, and simultaneously the possibilities of reproducing that time on screen as often as he wanted, to repeat it and go back to it. He acquired a matrix for actual time. Once seen and recorded, time could now be preserved in metal boxes over a long period, theoretically forever. Unquote. And so, over the decades, Tarkovsky recalls an essential part of world literature and most great dramatic and historical themes have been adapted for the screen. We all know that Tarkovsky was not the first one to theoretically establish the relationship between temporality and film, or to put it more rigorously, to underline film's ability to deal with the inexorable passage of time, which is to say, the fight against death. It is enough to recall the beginning of André Bazin's book, Qu'est-ce que le cinéma, in which the critic refers to film as the mummy of change, la momie du changement, recalling its photographic source and comparing it to early Egyptian religion, which was organized as a sort of rebellious system against death, thus responding to a human psychological fundamental need to defend itself against time. To be sure, so my sentence was, it is enough to recall this, so to be sure that this notion was born together with the first reflections upon the ontology of photographic and filmic imagery. It is a fundamental aspect referred to directly or by implication by other important film critics and filmmakers, including Eisenstein, Griffith, Krakauer, to name just but a few. And it is no coincidence that in his The World Viewed, Cavell indicates right from the start that his way of studying movies is essentially based on the way he remembers them, thus establishing a parallel between our memory, the instrument of recall, of bringing back to life things past, and the experience of watching a film as a way of having access to a world brought from death to life, to movement and action. It is important to understand that in Tarkovsky, this notion about the specific value of film art, which is so well summarized in the famous expression, time in the form of fact, is taken to the level of a very acute and profound understanding. We should start by asking ourselves, what is Tarkovsky really saying when he refers to time? What is the actual importance he gives to film's ability to fix that time? The first aspect we need to consider, and thus avoid a possible misunderstanding, is the fact that he is not speaking of time in terms of mere sequentiality or linear causality. He is not addressing the question of duration either, the durée that Bazin was very much interested in, both in a chronological sense and as historical value. For the Russian filmmaker, history and evolution are not strictly speaking temporal elements. They are the natural consequence of this phenomenon we call time. Time is not for Tarkovsky an objective datum, neither has it a merely psychological dimension. Its nature, for him, is essentially spiritual, and consequently, in this sense, only as a consequence, is it personal and subjective. Let us approach his reasoning by first considering the basic concepts by which we define temporality, present, past, future. The most complex, mysterious, and hard to define of the three is obviously the notion of present. It is also paradoxically the one most vital to us. Its complexity has to do with the fact that the present is actually impossible to capture, so that we can in some way observe it and try to understand it. By its own nature, the present always escapes us. It runs away, and it slips through our fingers like sand, and it has no material weight unless through memory. And I quote Tarkovsky again, "I am convinced that time is no objective category, since time cannot exist without man. Certain scientific discoveries tend to reach to the same conclusion. We do not live in the now. The now is so short, so close to zero, without being zero, that we have no way of perceiving it. The moment we call now immediately becomes past, and what we call future becomes present, and then at once it becomes past." Unquote. This mysterious place, so impossible to define, Tarkovsky calls an abyss. Yet the fact that we cannot grasp it or fully perceive it doesn't imply that it isn't decisive. On the contrary, up to a certain degree, we might even say that only what is present really exists. The past has ceased to exist, and future is yet to come. In his work on time and narrative, Temps et Récit, Paul Ricoeur states that remembering is having an image of the past. St. Augustine goes even further when he claims that the possibility we have of measuring things past is due to the fact that those things have left some kind of trace, a sort of vestige or mark within us. And it is that trace, that sort of image, that remains. And I quote him, well, my translation. Although truthfully recounting events which have passed, memory does not relate events themselves which have happened, but rather the words brought to mind by the images of those events. And this, filtered by our feelings, leave their mark on the human spirit. For Tarkovsky, the value of the traces retained by memory is, as I have said, of a moral nature, for the part they play in how a human being judges himself and becomes aware of what he is and what he wishes to be. Quote, the time in which a person lives gives him the opportunity of knowing himself as a moral being, engaged in a search for the truth. Unquote. In this sense, human consciousness needs this kind of time, which is placed before oneself through the act of recall, through memory. Memory is always the recollection of some kind of experience. So we remember according to that experience, or rather, according to the impression it made on us, and was assimilated, becoming part of our own identity. To recall an event is therefore to evoke it, to remember the way it was received by us, whether positively or negatively. This is why loss of memory is always somehow dramatic, carrying with it the loss of the possibility for self-awareness. The objective value of the person is not at risk, I think, but its subjective identity may eventually be lost. And with it, one also loses the possibility of distinguishing reality from fiction. In this sense, one may become the prisoner of illusions, incapable of using one's own freedom. So, if we consider what cinema can do, which is to capture what happens by recording it in a mechanical way, which imprints precisely the process of transformation itself, thus giving visibility to change, to the visible consequences of the passage of time in an iconical way that is physically identical to the aspects of the event that took place, be it either a fictional fact or a real one, then we must admit that cinema has brought to the history of mankind for the first time the possibility of achieving the impossible, which is to keep and faithfully reenact memory as a physical trace of events, thus favoring the way our consciousness may freely deal with them. Cinema thus contributes to the knowledge of our own experiences in a very specific way. That should be, for Andrei Tarkovsky, the function of every form of art, because he says all artistic work relies on memory and is a means of crystallizing it. And it is, in any case, I say, a means of putting us in front of what happens by artificially creating the necessary distance which allows us to judge, both emotionally and critically, thus helping us by literally giving us time to acquire a deeper and more vital knowledge of ourselves. In a way, we might say that cinema contributes to the construction of the self and of society by a process whose strength lies essentially in its private dimension. By personally adhering to what is seen on screen, we make it our own. It becomes part of our own personal experience. And what is there more private than my own memory, more defining of my own personal identity? Cavell believes this to be the reason why his project for a seminar on film aesthetics proved a failure. Everybody tended to confuse personal memories with the images of film themselves. This has certainly to do with the fact that film interests everybody, and unlike any other kind of artistic expression. Now let us move to two final aspects before watching some pieces of film which may help to elucidate this topic. Pasolini used to say that cinema expresses reality through reality itself, that is, through its exterior aspects, its surface. In this sense, it is not a language, it is the language of reality, since its nature is deeply iconical. Panofsky said that The medium of movies is physical reality as such. And Bazin's phrase is, cinema is committed to communicate only by way of what is real. The cinema is of its essence a dramaturgy of nature, he also said. Neither of these critics is denying the representational dimension of cinema or confusing the artistic medium and its constructed meaning with reality itself. They are stressing what is simultaneously cinema's strength and its weakness, its poverty, we may even say so. Namely, that movies cannot escape the way things are, since its medium is photographic and its subject reality. That is why Stanley Cavell defines film as a succession of automatic world projections, a succession, time, of automatic, photographic, world, reality, projections, views. This leads us immediately to the second and last topic I wish to underline, presence and absence. Unlike painting, a photograph does not present us with the likeness of things. It presents us, we want to say, and I am quoting Cavell again, with the things themselves. And now I add, with the things themselves, that is, with their existence in time. The mechanical basis of photography guarantees, even when it is radically constructed and manipulated, that we are looking at an image of the world. Now, we all know that objects in a photo belong to a moment in the past. Their presence speaks of their absence, as Barthes so well explained. Cinema has achieved something very specific, something Baudelaire had referred to and explicitly longed for, simultaneity of presence and absence. When I watch a movie, I am seeing an event which has already taken place. The event is not happening now, but my experience of it is present. It is as if it was taking place precisely at the same moment I am seeing it. This, we may say, is as close to the experience of real life as any other kind of expression could be. A world is taking place before me, a past world, and I have the chance not only of contemplating it, but also of experiencing it by sharing the same duration, by accompanying the process of transformation that time is operating, or has operated, in that world, as it is operating in myself. On the other hand, we cannot fail to notice that characters in a movie are not, strictly speaking, real flesh and blood people, although they are human. Manuel de Oliveira calls them ghosts. They are the recorded images, the moving images of real persons who may even have already died, separated from me by this sort of barrier that the screen is. They move on the other side of the mirror, reflecting their image on me, the spectator. It is precisely this idea that Tarkovsky wished to convey when he made his famous film Mirror. His movie is an allegory of film itself. It portrays the same way cinema frames and keeps time, thus offering me the renewed possibility of watching events from a new, privileged perspective, allowing me to widen and deepen my consciousness by recovering memory and dreams gone by, as does a mirror in reflecting my own image, thus offering me the possibility of contemplating myself from a different angle, both spatial and temporal, and therefore of either being able to see what is usually concealed from me, my own eyes, my ears, the effect of my movements. The whole movie has to do with this new possibility of having access to a past experience kept in memories and dreams and reflected on the screen. In this case, the film we are now going to see, a piece of it, Tarkovsky's Mirror, it is the memory of someone who recalls his own past life with some bitterness, wishing to pay, we could say, a debt of love. Tarkovsky wants to use cinema as a very special kind of mirror, the nostalgic and magical mirror, Alice's mirror, we could say, which reflects the irretrievable time of childhood and youth from different perspectives, multiplying these memories and thus offering others a new vision of their own lives, contributing in this way to the attainment of a moral judgment about oneself and our place on earth. And so, in our first piece of film, the structure of which is discontinuous, non-chronological, and deeply emotional, we hear the commentary of an adult man, Alexei, remembering his past as a time of possibility and hope. The second clip of the same movie shows us his son waiting in a room while the mother, who is separated from her husband, talks to a woman neighbor. The child looks at his own image in the mirror, as if the father, through his son's thoughts, could see his own faults and retrieve lost memories, the dripping milk of his childhood, we shall see, in the process of his son's becoming adult. So, let us take a look now at these two clips.
Мне с удивительной постоянностью снится один и тот же сон. Он будто пытается заставить меня непременно вернуться в те до горечи дорогие места, где раньше стоял дом моего деда, в котором я родился 40 с лишним лет тому назад, прямо на обеденном столе, покрытом белой крахмальной скатертью. И каждый раз, когда я хочу войти в него, мне всегда что-то мешает. Мне часто снится этот сон, я привык к этому. И когда я вижу бревенчатые стены, потемневшие от времени, и полуоткрытую дверь в темноту синей, я уже во сне знаю, что мне это только снится. И непосильная радость омрачается ожиданием пробуждения. Иногда что-то случается, и мне перестают сниться и дом, и сосны вокруг дома моего детства. Тогда я начинаю тосковать. Я жду и не могу дождаться этого сна, в котором я опять увижу себя ребенком и снова почувствую себя счастливым от того, что еще все впереди.
Now the second clip with the son, the child. A very different kind of example may be caught in the beautiful movie by Gabriel Axel, Babette's Feast, released in 1987 and based on the story by Karen Blixen. It was the first Danish movie to win the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. In a very Puritan and small community in 19th century Denmark, a French chef de cuisine, Babette, a victim of the French Revolution, is given refuge by two kind sisters, Martine and Philippa, whose father never allowed to marry, although both had had eligible suitors. After 14 years at the Danish island, working as housekeeper and living modestly, but never explaining what her former occupation was, Babette is shocked to learn that she has won a lottery. She decides to spend the prize by herself preparing a marvelous dinner for the small Puritan community. The beauty of the story lies in the impressive event which occurs when an unexpected guest, Lawrence, a famous general and man of the world, former attaché in Paris and once Martine's young lover, astonishingly praises the extraordinary quality of the meal to the austere group, who had promised not to indulge in the pleasures of the flesh, but little by little yield to the irresistible pleasure of the delectable dishes. The longest part of the film lies precisely in the duration of this meal, during which a profound and very significant event takes place: the transformation of each and every one of the guests and of their relationships with each another through the acceptance of the artistic beauty of the meal. This produces a sort of mystical redemption, both physical and spiritual. Little by little, their stiff silence is broken. They start recalling past events with joy. Their pale cheeks gain color, and the pleasure of the meal becomes evident. The final scenes are crucial because, through the dialogue between Martine and Lawrence, the general, the full meaning of what has just happened is caught. It is as if time had not passed, or as if its passage did not win over them. Through this dinner and this renewed encounter, Martine and Lawrence understand that their love had not been wasted, that it was alive and had been mysteriously fruitful and true during all those years. I'm not sure whether we are ready to get to the second clip, but in case it is ready, now let us see also two small pieces of the movie. 1987 movie, as I have said. Babette, of course.
I de store glas. Hvor fedt.
Den er god.
Den er god. Kan I huske dengang, da præsten havde, det var jo altså nærmest et mirakel, havde lovet at holde juleprædikenen i landsbyen på den anden side af fjorden. I 14 dage havde vejret været så hårdt, og ingen skipper eller fisker tog et kryds af fjorden. Folkene i landsbyen, de var ved at opgive håbet, men præsten han lovede dem, at kunne han ikke få en båd til at bringe sig over, så ville han komme gående på bølgerne. Og se, 3 dage før jul, så lagde stormen sig. Og det satte ind med så streng en frost, at fjorden frøs til fra bred til bred. Og dette var aldrig sket i mands minde.
The second clip with it's not exactly the final scene, but one of the final ones.
Jeg har varit hos er varje dag i mitt liv. Säg att ni vet det.
Ja, jag vet.
Då vet ni också att jag kommer att vara hos er varje dag. som ännu blir mig förunnad. Varje afton ska jag sitta till bords med dig. Inte med mitt läme som inget betyder, utan min själ. Och jag har i afton lärt, kära, att i vår sköna värld är allting möjligt.
Farvel og tak for i aften.
Farvel og mange tak.
Tak for en dejlig aften.
Tak fordi du kom.
Tak for jer.
Klokken slår, tiden går, evigheden os forestår. Lad os da bruge den kostbare tid, tjene vor Herre med al vor flid. Så skal vi nok komme hjem, så skal vi nok komme hjem.
Stjernerne er kommet nærmere. Måske kommer de nærmere hver nat. Måske får vi slet ikke sne i år.
Halleluja.
Well, the last and very short clip before concluding is from Oliveira's 2010 film O Estranho Caso de Angelica, the strange Case of Angelica, the story of a photographer, Isaac, Ricardo Trepa, called to take the last photos of a young girl recently married who had suddenly died. While positioning the camera in front of the young and beautiful corpse, Isaac experiences a strange and terrifying phenomenon, which will haunt him for a long time. The girl seems to come alive and smile at him, and therefore also at us. Isaac will consequently fall in love with the dead girl, Angelica. Thus, through the photographic image made dynamic in a film, we all become witnesses of the miracle of overcoming death through cinema. So, while he's preparing this last very short clip, I might say that this was elected the 8th best film for the American journal The New Yorker. It was a long-cherished project by Oliveira, who wrote it for the first time in 1952, but saw it refused during Salazar's regime. As you might all know, Oliveira was born in 1908, so only 10 years later than Eisenstein, and first began making films in 1927. He is still alive. He is now 104 years old, still active, although after more than 30 feature films, although his health is starting to fail him. Among many other prizes, he won 2 career Golden Lions from the Venice Film Festival. And so now the clip we are going to see is 1.5 minutes, more or less, and then I'll have one last minute to conclude. That's all. So we are going to see exactly the moment when Isaac arrives at a place. He's maybe it's important to say, is not a photographer, professionally speaking. He's a Jew that had to flee because of the war, Second World War, and who knows how to deal with a camera. So people call him to do this hard task of capturing these last images of the beautiful Angelica lying on a couch, as you shall see.
Então está bem assim?
Agora está melhor.
Já tirou a fotografia? Então? Sim ou não?
Sim, isto é, não. Quer dizer, ainda não. Estou à procura de um melhor.
Ah, bom. Nós esperamos então.
So, in all three of these movies, we can see what is or has been happening. We face the visibility of transformation, the action of time in the form of fact, in Tarkovsky's words. And we see it in such a way and with such iconic simultaneity that these past things become very persuasive and seem to be happening now. Their absence becomes present to me, to each one of us. Thus, by absorbing what has happened in a personal way, what I have seen becomes my own personal memory. Cinema has this dual characteristic of being both private and at the same time creating a community, since an identical phenomenon happens to each one of the spectators at the same moment. Is there any other artistic expression as close to real-life experience as this one? This is the specific power of film, its particular importance to everyone, as Cavell stresses, whether critic, cultivated, or relatively naive and unfamiliar with cinema. The ghosts behind the frame share our own experience. What has happened to them is reenacted and becomes ours as well, by surprising and persuading us. This experience is maybe the core thing in movies. As the French philosopher Alain Finkielkraut says, we are all condemned to events, to the way reality happens. And our choice is how to share in that reality. Film, like any other narrative form of art, puts us in front of the phenomenon of events which happen in time. This is actually what we all long for, wait for, hope for, the surprise and unexpectedness of events. Therefore, I close my paper with Robert Bresson's beautiful and profound advice to filmmakers: to provoke the unexpected, to wait for it, because, he adds, to film is to set up a meeting, nothing unexpected that you have not been secretly waiting for. Thank you.